Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, a significant double brokering scam has reared its head again. Some watchers estimate as much as a fourfold increase in it, with identity thieves going after fuel advance money on brokered loads where they can get an express code for a com check or other facilitated payment. In some cases, the thieves make off with the entire load payment with the real broker and carrier on the load, none the wiser. Using stolen carrier information gleaned from public online sources, thieves pose as a carrier, doctoring an insurance certificate to convince a broker to work with them. When they've fooled that very real broker, they then use stolen information from a different broker and post the load to a load board, often with a very high teaser rate to quickly lure in a very real carrier to take the load. Upon pickup, the thieves go back to the original broker and ask for a fuel advance. If they're successful, and if the real carrier on the load doesn't wise up to this scheme and delivers the load, the thieves are often enough successful in convincing the original broker to deliver the rest of the load payment to them. Who bears the biggest financial brunt in this scheme, typically? U.S. Postal Inspector Steve Cohen helped to partially unravel one of the mostly overseas rings operating these kinds of schemes.
We would have an occasional large company that would be taken. But for the most part, the carriers, because they're the ultimate victim. They're the ones that are really the ones losing. The brokers aren't, unless the load goes to a wrong spot, they're not losing out. Their reputation, if their identity is stolen, could hurt them. But as far as monetary loss, the carriers are the ones that lose the money. And almost all of our carriers were owner-operators or very small companies that operated still with invoices, sending invoices through the mail. Sure. Back to the original brokers. They weren't the large companies that required, payment right on top or, digital payment. They were definitely smaller mom and pop companies that were getting taken.
And what can be done to prevent this from happening? Steve Cohen's got answers.
So I think there's two big things the brokers could do to pretty much stop the scheme dead in its tracks. And if we can get the brokers to do this, I think the scheme would be done and they would have to move on to another scheme. They would probably figure something else out, but this actual scheme would be over. And the first is to verify independently. When you do that onboarding for the first time for a carrier you've never used, you're going to get their paperwork, you're going to get their insurance paperwork and all of their documentation. That insurance paperwork coming over is a very good fake document. The document itself is not very difficult to fake. It's like a one-page insurance verification that everyone uses in this industry. What they do is they just take that and they just change the email address and phone number to email addresses and phone numbers they have control over. So the company name is real, the address, everything is legitimate except that the email address and phone number. So when the broker or the individual doing the onboarding for the broker calls that number or emails them to verify, they're contacting the suspects themselves, and then they send back the verification, and it seems legitimate. And so the first thing I would say is for a first-time carrier that you're onboarding, do an independent verification. Look at the insurance paperwork first. Look at the company that's listed, and is that phone number a company for that insurance company? Is their email address a Gmail or Yahoo account? That would have been the first thing. Like, you don't even need to do the independent verification if you just took a look at that and said, wait a minute, Progressive and State Farm don't use Progressive Midwest at gmail.com. Those were things that, we noticed right away when we were getting the documentation, like, no, there's no way this is real. They don't use a Gmail account.
Right.
So that's the first red flag. If you don't see that, or it's an email address that doesn't pop out, just Google them. Look up the insurance company name, look for their phone number and call it independently. And when you do that, what you would have found is most likely that carrier isn't insured by that company, because that's the one thing our suspects didn't have, or they didn't know, or they didn't care. They didn't use the real insurance companies that the carrier used. They used any insurance company they felt like.
Yeah.
And so if you had called that number, you would have said, no, they would have been like, no, I don't use that insurance, or that insurance. We don't have them listed as a carrier. So that would be the first thing that I would suggest doing. The second one would be express codes for first-time carriers. and when I say express codes, I'm really talking about fuel advances.
Yeah.
The fuel advance for a first-time onboarded carrier. If you eliminate that, and really that's the only thing, if you eliminate, the entire scheme is over. They do not go any further. If they call up a broker and that broker will not do a fuel advance, they will not go any further in the scheme because they're not going to put the time in to move that load, and then halfway through the load, the victims find out, and then nobody gets any money.
Right.
So they want the money right up front. If you eliminate fuel advances for first-time carriers and you just put in a policy that says, the first time you join me or you work for me, I'm not giving you a fuel advance. I'm sorry, we can't do it. Once you move a load for us successfully, you can get all the fuel advances you want, but we can't do it on the first time. If you did that, you could stop the scheme outright. I mean, ideally, I would say get rid of all fuel advances, but my understanding of the industry is you just can't do that. It's a necessity in the industry. It sounds like it's something that needs to be in there. And so I would say first-time loads, don't do fuel advances. If you did that, the brokers are not going to get taken.
Let's talk about what carriers can do to sort of derail this midstream or avoid having their information stolen. I mean, I know that's next to impossible in some ways, but what are the things that carriers can do here from your perspective?
I think as far as protecting their identity, that's a difficult thing to do. Yeah. In today's day and age, especially with the DOT stuff, it's all public a lot of it's public. So It's very difficult to protect your information. I wouldn't even know where to start on telling them how to do that. They could do similar steps that the broker can for verification. So when they're bidding on a load and they go through the original steps, and if it's a broker you've never dealt with, again, look at the email addresses. Are they using a Yahoo or Gmail or Microsoft email address? If they are, they might not be real. A lot of the brokers are large enough where they don't use those kind of those email addresses. So looking at those, doing some independent verification on your phone, look for a phone number for them. Just put their name in your phone, Google it. Is that the phone number you're communicating with? Yep. And if it is, then you're probably okay. If that number doesn't come up as a company, call and find out, is this something that they're brokering? Right. Do a little bit extra due diligence when they ask you to take a blind load, or if the load seems to be too good to be true, like we talked about earlier. If they're paying you double than what you think that should cost for you to move that, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. It's not legitimate to think a broker is going to pay double to you to move that load when everyone else is paying X and this company's paying Y. Y is probably not legitimate. So when you see one of those, I'm not saying don't take it, but that's where you need to do the extra due diligence and look and see, is this a real broker? Ask the shipper when you show up, hey, who are you brokering with? And confirm it. If you have some suspicion, the shipper knows who they're working with, and so they're going to know. And if it's not the same company, well, then there's a red flag right there, and just pick up the phone and make a phone call. Right. That shipper's still going to want you to move the load, because that shipper is still expecting that load to be moved. They might be able to get you in touch with the real broker and let you work out a deal with them and move the load, because that shipper wants that stuff moved. They're not going to want to wait another 4 or 5 hours or a day to get somebody out there. Those are kind of the quick down and dirty steps I think carriers can take in order to protect themselves, because they're the ones, it's their money and it's their time. They're the ultimate ones that are going to get affected by this. So it's really important that they pay attention to what's going on, and they need to protect themselves.